It seems hard to believe that AIDS HIV has been with us for more than 35 years. 25 years ago, something was established, a place where people could go and reflect, smile, and also grieve. It has become known as the National AIDS Memorial, a grove in Golden Gate Park. Our conversation now with its Executive Director, John Cunningham. Hi, John.
Hi, David. How are you?
So we were saying this is your third visit to the show.
I think it is.
So we have seen a lot happen in the last 9 years. How have you seen the epidemic change? Before we start talking about how it's memorialized, how have you seen the epidemic change?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, we never thought, first of all, 35 plus years into this, that we'd still be here without a cure. But the treatment, the information, the opportunity that PrEP and other interventions provide to the community are beginning to, as I like to refer to it, write the third act of the play.
Right. Now, for a lot of people, PrEP is a whole new concept. For those who aren't familiar with what it is, explain what PrEP is.
Well, it's a pre-exposure prophylaxis. So it's a drug from Gilead, and it allows an individual to take that, and it blocks the transmission of the virus to the individual. So if it's an individual or if it's a mother, it also blocks the transmission, fetal transmission from mother to child. So if it's an individual that is engaged in a high-risk community, gay men who are sexually active, it is as close as we can get to a virus.
Right.
I mean, to a
cure.
Vaccine.
So we're not quite there. We don't have a cure yet, and we don't have a vaccine.
Right.
But we have something that helps.
Right.
Do you find that there is a generation of people for whom, well, they certainly went around 35 years ago, and even 25 years ago when we were looking for ways as a community to grieve and reflect, there's a whole group of sexually active people, sexually active gay men, for whom both these things are a complete concept. They're something they have to read about in books.
I think you're exactly right. I think for those of us that lived through it and many others, it's our responsibility to ensure that those, especially LGBT men and women, know how the fabric of their own community was created. And as one of our board members, Dan Bernal, says, you know, when it is all said and done, the National AIDS Memorial will be the sole HIV and AIDS organization with the awesome responsibility of telling the story, making sure that those young people and those individuals that follow us understand the structure, the dynamics, the idiosyncrasies of their own community.
Right. There's a wonderful PSA that you all put together last year, and I think we have some video of it. Let's take a look at that. There's two of your board members and supporters that are speaking more eloquently than I can about it.
Let's take a look.
These people had their entire address books wiped out by AIDS. The impetus for the AIDS Grove itself was there was no place for people just to gather and support each other. Gardens in and of themselves, or nature is very healing. People just needed somewhere to go to feel they were with others suffering like them.
I moved to the city in 1984 as a trans woman. I lost so many people I know to this epidemic in the last 30 plus years. Having a space to remember and celebrate them is crucial.
So those two women, Alice Russell Shapiro and Cecilia Chang, they have their own unique stories that have become part of the fabric of the Grove. Tell me about these two people. Well,
you know, Alice Russell Shapiro was dear friends with Stephen Marcus, and Stephen Marcus was the foremost landscape architect in San Francisco. The Grove was his vision. Jack Porter, who's been a long time board member and supporter, was his partner. So he, prior to Stephen realizing that he was positive, he had the vision of creating a healing garden around AIDS. After he passed, Alice and others felt that it was their role and responsibility to see that through, and thus the Grove was born. And Cecilia, you know, occupies a very centric place in our community, trans woman, HIV positive, health advocate, and really, I believe, speaks to the need of a memorial, a holder of the stories. A memorial obviously is made up of individual names that are engraved, as it is in the Grove, but really the key to a memorial is the stories behind those names. That's really what makes it up, and that's the fabric.
Yeah, and you know, I've lived in San Francisco now 30 years. You said here 25 years. Right. I remember biking through Golden Gate Park 30 years ago, and that part of the park was kind of It was a mess.
It was. It was a derelict, overgrown, neglected site at the time. And over the last 25 years, there's been over 175,000 volunteer hours dedicated to that space. It's a model public-private partnership. And I think furthermore, it speaks to what was going on in the city 25 years ago when the Board of Supervisors, Mayor Agnos, and others took the incredibly courageous step forward, realizing the magnitude of grief in this city and the need to create a space for this community to heal. And then in '96, Representative Pelosi had seen the magic and the miracle that is the Grove and what it delivered, and wrote the bill of Congress with Senators Feinstein and Boxer, and it is our only national memorial to HIV.
Right, I was going to say, because here colloquially, you know as well as I do, people call it the Grove.
Right, exactly.
But it is a national AIDS memorial. It's the only one, correct?
That's correct. It's the only federally designated memorial to HIV and AIDS, and that's very special.
Yeah, and so besides being special to us on a philosophical level, what does that mean funding-wise? What does that mean on the National Register? When I go and look at lists of national memorials, will this pop up?
Yes, it will. It will pop up. From a funding perspective, from day one, we have not sought public funding because we did not want it diverted from care and research and other services.
Is that still the case?
It is still the case. We actually reimburse the city 100% for our gardener every year, and we've invested over $3.5 million in infrastructure, and we granted it back to the citizens of San Francisco.
So in a real sense, I mean, I'm not trying to be kind of silly or emotional here, but the people for whom this Grove is really a spiritual place, they pay to have their own spot of grieving.
That's correct. It is their space. It was created by them and for them. And myself, staff, and board, we're stewards of your memorial.
Mm-hmm. How many people have you lost in your life to AIDS, HIV?
In excess of 75 at least.
Yeah. How many times have you gone there and sat and had a picnic in someone's memory?
As a matter of fact, I did it this Sunday with my husband. We sat on the meadow with our 2 dogs.
Yeah.
We reflected back on my partner that I lost nearly 18 years ago.
Yeah. I see that on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
I've gone there with friends before they died. I've gone there with friends after their spouses have died.
Right.
I've gone there sometimes just because it's a pretty place to sit. You say over 175,000 hours have been devoted. How many people do you think go to visit? And do you consider that a measure of success? And does a memorial need to be a numerical success?
I think that the memorial speaks for itself and what it delivers. We estimate that there's about between 45 and 50,000 casual visitors a year. We're obviously in a great part of Golden Gate Park. And, you know, as you indicated, this is our 25th anniversary. You know, and we reflect back and we look to the past, but most importantly, as a national memorial, it's our job to ensure that we continue to share the stories. You know, and there are other memorials that memorialize societal tragedy. You've got the Holocaust Memorial and Museum. You've got the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. And the National AIDS Memorial is committed to ensuring that we do preserve, curate, capture, and share those stories for future generations to learn not only the tragedy and the darkness, but as you well know, and I know who lived through this, there is so much light and there's so much hope, and there are so many great lessons of what it means to be a citizen of this world. And so we're committed to sharing that, and we're investigating how to do so.
All right. Well, of course, this community does parties really well, so I'm sure there's some, I wouldn't say celebrations, that's not right. Celebrating the lives of the people who are memorialized in the Grove, but what sort of commemorations do you have going on for the 25th anniversary? Well,
we will be honoring on the actual anniversary of the founding of the Grove, the city and county of San Francisco for their courage. We'll be dedicating a boulder, and then we head into our annual season around World AIDS Day with what has grown to be, well, voted as the top fundraiser, which is Light in the Grove on November 30th.
Absolutely. I remember being there a few memorable years ago during a rainy but wonderful night. Yeah.
Right, and we'll be honoring Al Baum that evening for his long-standing support. And then the next day is World AIDS Day, and we'll be honoring Paul Kawada, who is head of NMAC, National Minority AIDS Council. And we are right now working with the HIV Story Project in documenting the oral histories of the epidemic.
Well, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. You talked about how this is, and any memorial in a sense, is about the stories that it engenders and the stories that it preserves. How do we, I mean, you go there and it's beautiful and you sit and you reflect and it's an incredibly meditative and peaceful space. How do you preserve the stories?
Well, we've embarked on a probably 3 to 5 year project with about 20 different oral history focuses. Last year, we documented the oral history of the San Francisco leather community because it was really the precursor to the San Francisco model of response. This year, we're documenting the oral history of the hemophilia community, the tragedy that befell them around HIV and AIDS and the contaminated blood supply. On World AIDS Day, we'll have Jeannie White, Ryan's mother, with us. And we go from there to the caregivers, to the families, and we'll continue to document those, preserve them, at the present time have them available online and through our website. But the future will tell exactly where they all end up. We've got a commitment to ensuring that we will inform future generations. That's really the responsibility of a memorial.
Well, I've only got about a minute left, but I wanted to ask you about that. As far as future generations, is it just going to be people graying like us that are going to carry this message forward? I mean, are you engaging a younger community that are as impassioned and committed to preserving this history as you are? Yeah,
well, we launched 7 years ago the Pedro Zamora Young Leader Scholarship Program, and we've scholarshiped over $75,000 in continuing to support young people's activist work in the community. And then beyond that, you know, it is really a matter of how we engage and preserve those stories, because the story of AIDS is a story of social justice and human rights. And that's really the center beating heart that we really got to share, because what we went through and what we saw, it will happen again. We're seeing it now with, you know, Muslim phobia and immigration and Zika and the like. And if we don't tell that story, we don't document it and use this as a touchstone for future generations to engage in, then we haven't done our work and we haven't honored those lost.
Great. Thanks, John. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with John Cunningham, Executive Director of the National AIDS Memorial, known to those of us in San Francisco as the Grove. Next up, our conversation with Brenda Larrabee, who also does work on behalf of the National AIDS Memorial and a lot of other good causes, specifically raising money for LGBT nonprofits. We'll be right back.